She didn't do anything extraordinary. She just said my name the right way. And for some reason I still can't quite explain that simple, professional, quick moment is still here. Inside me, 3 weeks later. It wasn't supposed to be anything. It was just a routine checkup. But there's one thing she did, a gesture so small I almost didn't notice it at the time, that I replay in my head every time the apartment gets too quiet. And I need to understand what happened to me that day. If you've made it this far, I think this story is already a little bit yours too. Stick with me. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, where are you listening to this from today? There's a strange thing that happens when you try to ignore something you don't want to stop feeling. You start creating reasons. Small, reasonable excuses that fit well into a sentence and sound mature enough not to need explaining. I was tired that day. I'm like that with everyone, I get caught up in the details. It's the kind of narrative that works during the day when there's noise and chores and things to do. But at night, especially on a Thursday when the city outside is damp and the apartment smells of cold coffee, the reasons don't hold up to anything. I'm 22 years old. I'm a sophomore in college. I share a 2-bedroom apartment with a friend who travels every weekend to see her boyfriend. And most of my days have a rhythm I've chosen on purpose. Predictable, manageable, mine. I like knowing what comes next. I like waking up early enough to have silence before the world begins. I like things to make sense. That's why what happened bothered me so much. It wasn't anything I could write in a text and send to a friend. It wasn't anything that would make a story. It was a dental appointment. The 6-monthly checkup. I'd been putting off for months and finally scheduled because my gums were sensitive and I could no longer ignore it. 40 minutes in a reclining chair in a waiting room that smelled of mint and that hospital-grade detergent that seems the same everywhere. The television on the ceiling playing a silent episode of some cooking show. The nurse asking me to open my mouth wide. And then she went inside. Not in a dramatic way. She entered like anyone enters a room that is theirs, with that quiet confidence of someone who knows every corner without needing to look. She greeted me by name in a way I didn't expect. Not my last name, not my nickname, not a generic. "Hi, how are you?" She said my full name, with a minimal pause in the middle, as if she were reading carefully before speaking. I heard my own name differently. And something inside me paid attention in a way that hadn't been planned. I remember taking a deep breath and attributing it to nervousness about the dentist, which is real, it always has been. But I knew, even without admitting it, that it wasn't just that. It was something else. Smaller and bigger at the same time. Something that I didn't yet have the vocabulary to name. She washed her hands with that careful attention some people have for routine gestures, the kind of presence that makes even the mundane seem intentional. It wasn't performance. It was the opposite of performance. It was someone who was completely present, without letting a single part of her mind wander elsewhere. I realized that I do the opposite of that all the time. She sat on the bench next to the chair, adjusted the light, looked at me, not at my mouth, but at me, and said she was going to explain what she was going to do before she did it. That some people prefer not to know, but she always asks. And she did. I said I'd prefer to know. She said oh good in a way that wasn't protocol. It was confirmation. There's a difference between being treated as a patient and being treated as a person. I'd been to other dentists in my life. Most of them did everything at once. They'd ask questions and immediately touch you, talk, and then turn on the braces. Efficient, functional, completely impersonal in a way that we learn to accept as normal in clinical settings because that's how it works, right? You go, they do it, you thank them, you leave. She wasn't like that. She waited. She gave my body time to relax before anything else. When I involuntarily gripped the arm of the chair, she stopped. She didn't ask anything. She didn't look worried, she just waited. 3 seconds. maybe 5. And then she continued when she realized, somehow silently, that I was ready. I don't recall any healthcare professional ever doing this before. I don't remember ever feeling like my pace mattered. She was about 39, maybe 40, the kind of age that in another person might seem like a number. But in her it seemed like an accumulation of calmness, of knowing how to move without haste, of having arrived at a place within herself that I can't even properly describe because I haven't been there yet. Her hair was styled in a way that was practical, but not sloppy. Her voice was slightly deeper than I expected. Her hands, I noticed her hands because they were so close to my face and so precise, moved without tension, without that urgency to finish quickly. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't planned. And then I found myself realizing I was relaxing, which made me slightly tense again. She didn't notice. Or she noticed and said nothing, which may be a more sophisticated form of care than I am yet able to recognize. When she lightly touched my shoulder to let me know she was going to recline the chair a little more, the lightest possible pressure, the quickest possible, something inside me went absolutely still. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. There's a betrayal the body makes that we never see coming because it's silent and undramatic. It's not a racing heart or shortness of breath. Those things are too big, they give it away, you can name them. What the body really does when it's paying attention to something it shouldn't is more subtle. It's a kind of tuning. Like when the volume of everything else drops a little and a single sound becomes clearer. That's what happened to me in that chair. The noise from the office was there, the machine, the quiet conversation outside, the cooking show on the ceiling. But I could hear her breathing, not because she was loud. Because my body had decided, without asking me, that it mattered. She was working. Focused, professional, in a completely aseptic space with a very specific task. And I was lying there looking at the ceiling, trying to hide the fact that I had just noticed that the way she tilted her head slightly when she looked closer made me want to keep looking. It wasn't exactly admiration. It was something else, quieter, more confused. I tried to think about something else. I thought about the test I had the following week. I wondered if I'd forgotten to send an email. I thought about remembering to buy almond milk on the way back. The kind of functional thinking that serves as an anchor when you need to pull yourself back down to earth. But then she spoke, just a technical observation, something about my gum on the left side being slightly inflamed. Nothing serious, probably stress. Which was likely, and her voice got too close to my face and I completely forgot about the almond milk. The problem wasn't her. The problem was that I was very aware of where every part of her was. How much space there was between her fingers and my face. When she moved away a millimeter to change instruments and when she came back. This kind of spatial tracking that we do unintentionally when something matters. I was doing it with someone in a dental office one afternoon in October wearing latex gloves and a mask, and I wondered what that said about me. I couldn't reply. She finished and leaned back in the seat, removed her gloves with that quick, dry movement, and gave me a second to give instructions before getting into the chair. When she asked how I was feeling, she looked directly at me again. I said, "Well, thank you." The truth was more complicated than I knew how to explain. She called me into her office to talk about the report, not the consultation room, but the small office in the back with the window overlooking a side garden I never would have imagined existed there. There was a large plant in the corner, a coat hanging on the back of the door, a half-empty cup on the table. Real-life things occupying a clinical space. I sat down in the chair next to the table. She sat down on the other side and opened the computer, but didn't turn to it immediately. She turned to me first and said she wanted to make sure I understood everything before anything else. That sometimes people leave without asking what they wanted to ask, because it seems like the moment has passed. But the moment hadn't. I had nothing to ask, but I stayed. She explained about the care I should take with my gum-specific toothpaste. a softer toothbrush, trying not to clench my jaw when I was stressed. And while she was talking, she rotated the monitor slightly so that I could see the images along with her, which meant that we were both looking at the same point, from similar distances. It was a completely normal situation. It happens in doctors' offices all the time. But there was something about the quality of her attention. The fact that she wasn't staring at the monitor and talking to herself, she was including me, adjusting the pace of her explanation as I reacted, that made it seem different from how things usually are. More thoughtful. More present. At some point, she realized I had misunderstood an instruction and paused, not to correct me, but with the patience of someone who has seen many people misunderstand and discovered that the answer isn't to repeat it louder, it's to rephrase it. She rephrased it twice from different angles until I felt I had arrived at the right point. I remember thinking, when was the last time someone reworked it for me? I couldn't remember. When the consultation actually ended, when I picked up the card for the next appointment and she said something light and casual as she walked me to the exit, I realized that during the last 15 minutes in that office, I hadn't thought about anything else. Not the test, not the email, not the almond milk. I had been completely present. And this was so unusual in my life that I left the office outside, stopped on the sidewalk with the cold October wind hitting my face, and stood there for a while that I couldn't measure, just breathing, without knowing exactly what he was trying to let settle. It took me 3 days to admit to myself that I had spent the previous 3 days thinking about it. Not constantly. Not obsessively. It was more like when a song keeps playing beneath everything you're doing. You're not actively listening, but it's there, and every now and then the chorus comes on stronger and you realize it was there all along. I was reading for class and I stopped mid-sentence because her voice came to mind, not what she said, just her tone. That particular quality of speaking as if she had plenty of time. I stared at the sentence for another minute, went back to it and tried to continue. I continued. But that was the norm. I was washing dishes and thinking about the garden I'd seen from her office window. I was waiting for the bus and thinking about the way she waited before continuing the procedure when I'd become tense. Small things. Gestures I shouldn't have registered with such resolve. But I had. The problem with acknowledging something is that once you acknowledge it, there's no way you can deny it. You can continue choosing not to think about it. You can continue constructing reasonable excuses. You can very well spend the whole week attributing it to tiredness and the fact that you're a detail-oriented person. But at some point, for me, it was on a Sunday night with the rain hitting the window and my roommate out of town, you stop in the middle of what you're doing, and you let the thought complete the sentence you'd been cutting in half. I thought she was beautiful. Not in an abstract way. Not like I find a sunset beautiful or a song good. I found her beautiful in the specific, concrete way that warms your cheeks and makes your breath change rhythm for a second. I found her beautiful and it stayed in my head because it was hers, that woman, with that voice and that patience and that garden outside her window. And she was 17 years older than me, and she was my dentist. It wasn't complicated to understand why I'd avoided getting to that point. The problem wasn't understanding. The problem was what comes after understanding. That slightly nauseating wait to know what to do with something. You didn't ask to feel, and that has no obvious place to go. The rain continued. I remained seated. The next appointment was scheduled for 6 months later. I know this because I looked at the card more than once in the following weeks, not because I was counting, but because it kept popping up. In my purse, on my bedside table, once folded inside a book I was using as a bookmark without realizing it was the card. I didn't call to reschedule for earlier, but I didn't throw the card away either. He had a moment about 3 weeks after the consultation when I was in a cafe near the college and a woman walked in with the same kind of posture. That quiet confidence in the way she moved. For a split second, my body reacted before I visually processed that it wasn't her. It was just someone who looked similar. It was just a coincidence of posture in a Portland cafe on a Wednesday afternoon. But my chest had tightened. And that told me something that I had to accept. What I didn't know was whether she had felt anything. It wasn't reasonable to assume she had. She was a professional. I was a 22-year-old patient she saw for 40 minutes every 6 months. She probably had dozens of patients. That's probably how she was, with everyone careful, present, reframing until the explanation came. That was probably just how she worked, and I had read something personal into something that wasn't personal at all. That was the simplest explanation. But then I remembered the way she had paused when I became tense without saying anything. And how she had given me that space without me asking. And how she had turned the monitor, that small gesture, completely unnecessary from a clinical point of view, so that I could see along with her. And I couldn't be sure if it was just protocol. And I couldn't be sure that it wasn't. And this uncertainty occupied space in a way that certainty of any kind wouldn't. Because with certainty you know what to do. With uncertainty you just stay. With the open question. With the card that won't go in the trash. Sometimes I imagined what it would be like to sit in her office again. Not the consultation, the office. With my coat by the door and my cup half empty. I wondered if she would leave room for silences the same way she did for questions. I figured as much, and I didn't know what to do with it. There was a day when I almost told someone. My friend Priya, the one who lives with me, the one who travels every weekend, came back early from one of those trips because her boyfriend had an appointment, and the two of us stayed in the living room with delivery pizza and some random thing on TV. She was in the mood to chat, which sometimes happens with her. She asked how I was doing, genuinely, not the kind of question you expect a good. He asked if I was dating anyone, if I had been interested in anyone, if I was happy. I stayed quiet for a second. That was way too long. She noticed. She knows me. She said hey in the tone that means she can talk. And I opened my mouth. I closed it. I opened it again. I said no, that I was fine, that I was focused on college, that maybe after the semester things would calm down to think about relationships. I said it with enough conviction to sound genuine. She accepted it, or pretended to accept it, because she also knows me well enough to know when I'm cutting a story short and change the subject. But I kept wondering what I would have said if I had said it. Would I have mentioned her name? Probably not. Would I have mentioned she was my dentist? Probably not, because that would have made everything immediately more complicated to explain without sounding like something it wasn't. Would I have managed to get to the part where what mattered wasn't the attraction, but the way she treated me as if my pace mattered? Probably not. There are things that we understand perfectly on the inside, but that fall apart when we try to put them into words. Not because they aren't real, but because the language we have for love and attraction is built upon pre-existing narratives. And when what you're feeling doesn't fit into any of those narratives, it becomes difficult to find the right place to begin. And I wasn't sure it was love. I wasn't sure it was attraction, exactly. It was something that happens before it has a name. That may never have a name. That may just be this particular, uncategorized thing that appears sometimes when someone treats you in a way you didn't know you needed, and that doesn't solve anything. Doesn't lead anywhere, it simply stays. I ate my pizza. Priya laughed at something that came on TV. And I thought what I would have said if I had said it. At some point, there wasn't an exact moment, it was an accumulation. I made a practical decision. Not dramatic. Not a deliberate break with name and weight. Just a quiet choice to stop actively inhabiting that place. To stop letting my mind wander when the apartment was quiet and the night made everything easier to feel. To treat it for what it reasonably was, a significant moment that had affected me. That said something about what I needed or wasn't getting in my life. But that led nowhere and therefore could be acknowledged and kept. It worked. The way things work when you put in enough effort. I finished the semester. I got a good grade on the tests that had been worrying me. I started hanging out more with a new group of people I met in a special topics class. Loud, funny people who liked to go to bars where the music was too loud to have a real conversation, which at the time sounded like exactly what I needed. I drank a beer. I laughed at the right things. It was a life that worked. But one night, I got home after one of those shows and went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, and I stopped. Just for a second. With the toothbrush in my hand and the mirror in front of me. Involuntarily thinking about the instruction she had given me with that patience that rephrases until it's just right. I released some of the tension that I hadn't realized I was carrying in my jaw, and I went to sleep. I didn't tell anyone about that moment. It wasn't the kind of thing that makes a story. It was just a second in the day of an ordinary person in a small bathroom in an apartment in Portland. No resolution, no specific meaning, but it stayed. The way it remained, not as an active presence, more as a texture. Like when you move something in a room and for weeks your eye goes back to where it used to be before you adjusted it. You know she's not there anymore. The eye will still go. December arrived with that particular Portland chill that isn't the most intense of winter, but carries a dampness that seeps in. I went to my parents' house for the holidays, Sacramento. A 6-hour drive, my mother cooking too much, and my father showing me the movies he chose to rewatch every year. Familiar, safe, completely mine in a way that the apartment still isn't. But even there. One morning I woke up early before everyone else and went to make coffee. And while I was waiting for the coffee maker, I looked out the window at the back garden of my parents' house, which is a completely ordinary suburban American garden. Nothing special, and I thought about the side garden I had seen from her office window that October afternoon. I didn't think about her exactly. I thought about the garden. The large plant in the corner of the office. The coat by the door. The half-empty cup on the table, that completely mundane detail of real life that I shouldn't have meticulously preserved. But I had kept it. Memory doesn't ask for permission. That's the problem nobody mentions when talking about moving on from anything. It doesn't have to be a great love. It can be that smaller, nameless kind of feeling memory isn't interested in your practical decisions. It keeps what it wants and returns it when it wants. And especially when you haven't asked for it. I wondered what the office would be like at this time of year, if she put up any Christmas decorations like most places do. I imagined maybe not. I imagined the office remained the same. A plant, a coat, a half-empty cup, a window overlooking a garden that no one expected to be there. I imagined she was still working the same way, with that patience that brings about change. With that space before continuing. My mother came down to the kitchen. She asked me if I had slept well. I said yes. I poured coffee into 2 cups and turned to her, intentionally being present because she hadn't done anything wrong, and I enjoyed being with her. But for a second, before turning around, I looked at the garden again. And I wondered if she knew she had left something in me. If anyone knows when they do that. January. New semester. I had promised myself it would be different, not as a dramatic New Year's resolution, just that simple, honest decision to do things slightly differently. Go out less to events that didn't nourish me. Spend more time with people I could have real conversations with. I signed up for an elective philosophy class that I didn't need but wanted. It was a good decision. But something small happened in February. I had a toothache. It wasn't an emergency. It was a discomfort I could probably ignore for months, the kind of dull, peripheral pain you learn to live with when you don't want to deal with the cause. I'd done it before. I'm good at it. But I picked up the phone. I stared at the number on the card for longer than necessary. The pain wasn't the only reason I was calling, and I knew that, and that was probably the problem. And I was probably making a not very wise decision. And there were probably other dentists who could take care of a minor discomfort without all this hassle. I called anyway. The receptionist answered. I gave her my name and said I was a patient, that I had come in October and was feeling some discomfort and would like to have it checked. She checked the schedule. She said there was an available appointment the following week, on a Thursday afternoon, if that was convenient. I said it was convenient. I put the phone back on the table. And I sat there for a moment with a kind of clarity that wasn't exactly comfortable. Because I knew what I had done. I had taken the peripheral pain as permission to do something I wanted to do anyway, which is an inconvenient honesty that I generally prefer not to have with myself. But there was, Thursday, good afternoon. 6 days. She recognized me before I even sat down, not with surprise. With that quiet recognition, some people have a slight opening in their face. Not exactly a smile, more like a sign that the information had arrived and been received. She said my name. In the same way. With that pause in between. I said hand. I didn't know what to do with my hands. The consultation was less extensive than the first. It was a minor discomfort she checked, explained what was happening. It was a sensitivity that could be treated with a gel and attention for a few weeks. Nothing that required a procedure. Nothing that justified necessarily calling. She didn't say that, but I knew that she knew. Or maybe I was projecting. Maybe she dealt with minor emergencies every day without questioning the reason for each one. But there was a moment when she finished explaining and closed the computer and still hadn't gotten up when she paused. 1 second longer than protocol dictates. And he said, "How are you, in general?" Not as a clinical verification, in another way. I said I was fine, that the semester had started, that I was trying to make better choices about how I used my time. I said more than I intended. She listened, without filling the silence. Without pushing, without the kind of interest that's actually waiting for its turn to speak. She just listened. When I finished, when the sentence simply ended instead of being neatly concluded, she said that sounded good. That making conscious choices about what nourishes you was harder than it seemed. I said it was. She said yes, agreeing with me, like someone who knows from experience. And then there was something I wanted to say. Not about the toothache. Not about the semester. About October. About the garden I hadn't expected. About the fact that she had given me something not romantically, not in a way that required reciprocity, but something real that I had taken away with me without her knowing. I didn't say that. I picked up the card for my next appointment 6 months in August, and she walked me to the exit as usual. At the door, she told me to take care of my gums, that the gel would help, and to come back if it got worse. I said, "Thank you." She said, "You're welcome." I went out into a February afternoon that was colder than I had prepared for, and I turned around once, just once, before turning the corner. She had already gone back inside. There's a plant on my apartment window right now. I bought it in March, a fern that needed little light, which was necessary because the living room window doesn't get direct sunlight all afternoon. The woman who sold the plant said it was hardy, that it could withstand some neglect, that it was the kind of plant that wouldn't disappear even if you forgot about it for a few days. I liked that description. She's fine. The plant. It's there on the windowsill, a little bigger now than when I brought it, growing slightly irregularly, more to one side than the other, in the direction that gets more light. Sometimes when I'm sitting in the living room in the morning with my coffee, before the day really begins, I look at it and think of the side garden of a dental office on a street. I now know well enough to know that there's a bakery on the corner that smells wonderful on winter mornings. I don't think about her every day. But I think differently than I used to. Quieter, more honest. Without that discomfort of carrying something nameless, because I've learned that not everything needs a name. Some things exist in the category of what affected you in ways you didn't ask for. And yet, it was good to have felt. That taught you something about what you need that you didn't know how to name before. She taught me that I needed my own pace to be respected. That I needed someone to wait. That's not a small amount. It's actually quite a lot. My next appointment is in August. It's actually is in August. My next appointment. My next appointment is in August. I'll go, not expecting anything different. She's my dentist. I'm the patient, and none of the stories I hear in movies begin in a dental chair. And maybe that's why real life sometimes happens there, in places we weren't paying attention to. I'll go at my own pace. I'll leave room for silence. I'll look out the office window to see if the garden is still there. And if she pauses, that extra second pause, the one that's not protocol, I'll recognize it. Without having to do anything with it. Sometimes, simply acknowledging it is enough. Sometimes recognizing is. And with something you never said out loud.